Afternoon everyone. Back with another video. What I'm going to do today is I'm just going to talk through the changes I've made to my project. Because offline, sort of off the video, I've been adding in the other biomes and I've been tidying up my graph and tidying up the project a little bit. So I'm just going to walk through everything I've been doing for this video. I'm not really going to be creating anything new. So as you can see, we've now got the swamp and the plains biome. Plain is very basic yellow. The swamp has its own noise, so it looks a bit more like Valheim Swamp, where it's very close to the water level and it's a bit broken up. The dark forest, or the dark black forest, can't remember what Valheim calls it now, has a different, more sort of bumpy noise, and it also goes higher than the meadows can. The plains and the meadows both share the same noise, so there's no difference there. And I've also not done anything yet to the mountain or the ashlands. And additionally, I've sorted out the world origin so that it's always going to be starting on land, and it's a calm meadow until further out. You can more or less see that that's a circle, but it's a noisy circle, and I'll cover that as well. As far as cleaning up the project, I've moved everything into a Valheim example project and split it out in between the metadata, the graphs, and material stuff, and I've created more materials for each of the biomes. To support the different materials, I also installed Maui's landscape auto material, which is free on Fab. So all I did there was when I was creating a new biome, let's do plains, added in the normal and I added that to the height. I have no idea if that's right or not. From the Maui project. So the Maui project has dirt, grass, rock, sand again, snow, and stones. So I've just used most of those to create basic biomes. Can't remember if there's any I haven't done yet, but I'll be saving some of them for like cliffs or sloped material where either dirt or rock should be exposed. But that'll come in a future video. So that's everything I've done outside of the graph, and now let's go into the graph. So the first thing I've done is I've organized everything a lot more. So I've separated everything from the output. I've now got my noise, and I've got my color buffer, and I've got my material buffer. So these are extended from last time to add in the new biomes. So meadows, dark forest, swamp, and plains. The color buffer has been unplugged from the output, and I've just created a local variable for it. I've added a second biome split for the plains and the swamp. I've added more rings, so the inner ring to stop foliage, to make it a meadows at origin, middle ring to control spawning of swamp and plains, making sure the swamps and plains don't appear too close, and the outer ring already exists. The other thing I've done on all of these rings and everything else is that I've created two different versions. I've created a sharp blend and a soft blend. That is for the sharp blends are used for the material, and the soft blends are used for the terrain. So when you see here that I'm blending in the color or the material, I'm using the sharp blends, and up here, I've collapsed these to functions, I'm not using the sharp versions, I'm using the soft versions. Which leads me into the other thing I've done here, which is I've collapsed a few of these noises for the terrains into functions. To collapse a node into functions, you just highlight everything, right click and collapse to function. And then on the left hand side, I've also organized a bunch of the local variables into sharp blends, soft blends, just a generic graph data, and then the basic outline variables. Anything that needs explaining there? I collapsed this distance function that I was using quite often. I've just sort of done it once up here and created it as a local variable. On my rings, I've added this noise. Very simply, it's got a high feature scale, And what that does is it just makes the circle bumpy. So whereas, it looks close to a perfect circle, but it's not. And then further out, if I zoom out further, you can see that the swamp isn't starting until, well, it's starting in a sort of noisy way. So yeah, to achieve that, added a noise with a high feature scale and a high amplitude to my distance from the origin. I'll just loop back to these sharp blends versus soft blends. The soft blends are needed to make the terrain transition smooth. If I was to set that to 0, the difference between the terrains would just be like a cliff. But I don't want the materials to blend over 5,000 units. I want the materials to blend pretty sharply, really. 500 is probably too much as well. I think elsewhere I've used only 50, so in between the Black Forest and the Meadows I've used a fall off of 50, which is probably more appropriate. What else have I done? Yeah, I've still done the same thing for the Deep Northern Ashlands, the sharp versions and non-sharp versions. Distance weighting is new as well. So this is to make it less likely for swamps to appear further out, and then also later on it exposes some more meadow where the plains would be. So how that works is that sort out the distance. This needs tinkering with a bit because it's got to match the scale of the biome split. So the size of my world is 1,000,000 units, so that's why that's 0 and 1,000,000. But as for the min max, that's based on this amplitude of the second biome split. So when you're using a height splitter and you've got an amplitude of between minus 10,000 and 10,000, you're basically sort of separating the buffers. So where I had probably 0 before in the height, that meant it was perfectly 50-50, so half of the map would have been swamp and half of it would have been plains. But by using a distance weight to change where this height splitter is, to change where it says it's either plains or swamp, at what point, I can use the distance based on that to reduce the amount of swamp further out, or reduce it so it's less likely to be a swamp further out. And similarly, I've done this to reintroduce some meadows, because once I'd overwrote the meadows in with the swamp and the plains, that just wasn't showing up anymore. So I extended this distance weighting to strip out some of the plains to make it so that basically the whole terrain didn't have one of these values, so that it was showing what was underneath. And in that case, this was meadow. So to see what that means, we've got to zoom right out. So although there's nothing really stopping the swamp from spawning further out, because it's got a much lower probability, you can see it's densest around where it starts appearing, and then it's very sparse further out. Whereas the plains starts at sort of equal strength, and then some of it's getting taken over by the swamp, and then at the other end, some of it's getting taken over by the meadows. So that is that. Another thing I've done is everywhere I'm using an advanced 2D noise node, I've made a parameter seed which I can change from the viewport, and I've mixed it because I don't want the noises to have the same seed. And so everywhere you'll see it, apart from the base noise, I've used the base seed. Everywhere else I've mixed it. So that's these three, and up here as well for these rings. Actually, this one could be mixed as well. Doesn't necessarily have to be done. But I just feel like it's going to be deterministic, because it's all based on the same base seed. But I don't want sort of the inner ring and the outer ring to have the same seed, just because with them having different amplitudes and feature scales, you'll sort of recognize the pattern. So if the inner ring had a sort of a bubble outwards at the same point, if you sort of kept walking in the same direction, the outer ring might have a similar bubble or something. So I just decided to mix the seeds. And then as for the terrain noises, again I've collapsed it to function, but they take in the base noise, which is the base noise, and then it takes in the soft blends. So how I want the terrain to blend together, how sort of gently I want it to blend together. If I double click on this, it will open the function, but you can also see I've got it open here already. It takes the input, which is in this case for the first biome you do need the base noise and the prior noise, but everywhere else it's just the prior noise, so the previous noise. So I've got the base noise, which is what I was using for my meadows and plains, and then I'm just adding to it. And here I'm adding to it two different noises, just because I wanted the right feel really. And it's a very fiddly work, this stuff. This just makes it a lot higher than the meadows. It's 1 octave with a low feature scale and a high amplitude. This one is a lower feature scale with more octaves and a smaller amplitude, and this is what is making the Black Forest bumpier. If I go down, you can see it's quite a bit bumpier than the meadows and the plains, which is very smooth. So I add both of those to the base noise into this buffer here, and then I interpolate between the old noise and the new noise. Oops. With the alpha being my soft blend for that terrain. So if I close that and open my swamp noise, again I've got the same swamp alpha, well, apart from swapping the sharp for the non-sharp, going into my swamp terrain noise. So I'm taking the prior noise, I'm putting that into a interpolate node, linear interpolate, sorry, but I'm not using the base noise at all in what I want the terrain to be on the swamp, because the swamp is quite a lot different, isn't it, from the rest of the terrain in Valheim. So for one thing, it's very flat. It's close to the water level, barely reaches above it. And there's also quite a lot of water running through it. So if we go to the swamp here, this is my approximation of it. It's obviously not perfect and can do with a lot more tweaking, but it is reminiscent of the swamp in Valheim. And so I've got my seed coming in, I'm mixing it, and then I'm making two separate seeds from that. Create a local variable for that. Now this is relatively complex. So this noise here is to try and make it not too flat on top of the surface. But then I am still using this minimum here, which is probably making it flat actually. The main component of the swamp is this: low feature scale, low amplitude, and then to get most of it out of the water and just have these little dips that are going into the water, I just added a stock 300 to the noise, and then I'm plugging this into a min node, which is basically going to pick out the smallest value of these two buffers. And yeah, this is again trying to. It's got that flat top, but it's not supposed to be perfectly flat. Or maybe I'm doing a bad job of that right now. If I just plugged this in, for example, you'd see that you can see where the noise is coming up and then reaches a maximum and then goes back down. I don't really want this bumpiness. I do want it sort of flattened out along the top of the swamp, and that's what the goal of this was. So plug that back in. My plains terrain noise is pretty simple. I'm not actually doing anything. Like I said before, the plains is the same as the meadows, so I'm not doing anything there. And then the final function I've created so far is the player spawn pad. So this again, this is just a collapsed version of what we had in the previous video. Nothing here. Oh, the one thing that has changed here is that because the spawn pad was a ring, it was functioning very similar to the inner ring and the outer ring. So this is, I don't know where the outer ring, where the middle ring is. Oh, the middle ring is like here, around here basically, because you can see the noise shifting up pretty aggressive now, I think. Who knows? But either way, the ring around the player spawn pad is here, and yeah, it goes out, but it's also not a perfect circle. So here's an example of probably where it's hitting the circle, but then getting a bit noisy. So now that I've set all that up and hooked everything up like that up, and my seeds and stuff like that, I can just hit this, and I've now got a new world, completely new world. The basics are still the same, and to be honest, I might try and make the swamp fade in a bit more gently. I feel like you just get to a point and then you're running into swamp no matter what. I might lower that, but for the rest of it, I'm relatively happy with how much of everything there is. I know at some point I might go around and add the mistlands in, which will take out some of the plains that we've got available. Maybe there's a bit too much plains, to be honest. I could lower that even further, but it's all getting pretty subjective at this point. I've got it working, my seeds are working. Might make the inner bit a bit bumpier as well. But I've got all my different worlds. I think I need a bit more mountains as well, because at the moment there's only really the deep north, which is a full biome. And then we don't have any foliage or anything, but once I click play, I'm in and I can see roughly the scale of the world. So that's an update. Next steps are going to be testing out a water system to get some water in here. I'm not a material expert, so I am going to be borrowing a water material from a paid plugin actually. I'm going to be borrowing ESRPG's water for the demonstration. I've bought their product and I quite enjoy it. But yeah, I'm not a material guy. And I will also be updating to the dev branch of Voxel plugin, which is sort of a pre-version preview 7, pre-preview 7, I guess, to get access to some other new features that the Voxel plugin team have been working on. That's going to upgrade our materials to what they're now calling surfaces, and it's going to allow us to make sort of an auto material for the slopes. So at the moment, this slope is just showing the same as everything else, but I want it to show sort of exposed dirt, and then on the mountains I want it to show exposed rock, etc. So that'll be easier for me to do on Preview 7, the Voxel dev branch. And it's also got some good stuff for splines and water that'll be able to make it so that I can make a very valheim-y water system as well. So that's the next steps, and yeah, let me know if you have any questions or any ideas for what you want to see next. After I've looked at the slope blends on the material and the water, I will definitely from there start moving into PCG. Both placing points of interest, so you know the various things you see on the Valheim map, like the bosses and the dungeon and the crypts and stuff like that. And eventually I want to try and wait for 5.6 before I do anything foliage based, because PCG gets a few improvements for foliage there. But we can certainly start on everything else before then. We'll probably do some trees before then as well. So yeah, if I missed anything, just reach out in the comments and I'll try and answer any questions. And yeah, I'll catch you later. Thanks very much. Bye.